Welcome to class number 3 on the New Testament in its historical perspective. First time we talked about Rome a good bit, about the Roman Empire. Last time we talked about what did Judaism look like during the time of Jesus. And this time we want to talk about what did Palestine look like in the time of Jesus. We have so many place names that are mentioned and so many governors and so many other characters and geographical locations that let's take a little bit and think about what's where. We usually have a general idea as to where everything is, but let's go into a little bit of detail. Nathan, if you'll click on the first image, image 1, it's a map of the area. And we can see in that map the various places that are mentioned, not only Jerusalem and Judea, but also there's Samaria and Galilee and a region called the Decapolis. Decapolis was just it's what they referred to as the 10 cities. Now, if you look down at Judea there, you see the underlined city. It's Jerusalem, a little bit in from the Dead Sea. And along the coast are the principal cities that we remember from the Old Testament times, especially from the times of the Philistines, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, and then there's Jaffa and more along the way up there. So let's talk about Galilee first. That's the farthest north. Well, the farthest north on the map you'll see is Syrophoenicia. And Syrophoenicia, you remember, there was a woman who came to Jesus, and it said that she was a Syrophoenician woman. Well, this is the area that she came from. And she was the one who came and asked Jesus certain questions about teachings, and Jesus almost refers to her as a dog. And yet she pushes through and says, yes, but even dogs are allowed to eat the scraps from the master's table. And Jesus just flips over her answer. He loves it and says, exactly right. That's exactly right. What great faith. Jesus is always talking about the faith of Gentiles. Basically, the Syrophoenician woman, the centurion, remember, he says that he hasn't seen faith like that in all of Israel. So south from there, you'll see Galilee, and the large lake there is called Lake Tiberias, also referred to in the Gospels as the Sea of Galilee. Now, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee. If you look on the map, you can see to the south of Galilee itself in that sort of I guess I'm going to call that a tan color. Nazareth is down there near Cana. Not so far from Mount Tabor, as a matter of fact. And so Jesus, even though he's born in Bethlehem, after returning from their flight into Egypt, Joseph takes the family up to Galilee to Nazareth. And so Jesus, of course, becomes known as Jesus of Nazareth. That's where he spent his childhood and grew up there. This northern territory of Palestine was also Jesus' most important activity. You think about when he goes in the boat, he's getting in the Sea of Galilee when he calms the storm. He goes to Cana, where the wedding takes place, and his mother convinces him to, get some wine for everybody. At Capernaum, he visits there an awful lot. In fact, Peter looks to come from that region as well. Magdala, of course, we know who comes from there, Mary of Magdala, Mary Magdalene. So this was an area that was extremely important, and it's going to have really a big impact on the trial of Jesus. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So now, apart from the larger towns of Sepphoris and Tiberias, the city of Tiberias, Galilee is mostly a country area, and agriculture is the main occupation. Now, the lake of Tiberias, or the Sea of Galilee, sometimes called the Lake of Gennesaret, was famous for its fishing. In fact, that's where Jesus finds his first disciples, is there among the fishermen, according to Mark chapter 1. In the time of Jesus, Galilee was surrounded by a number of Greek cities. There was also in Galilee a group of 10 towns called the Decapolis, which was over here in the purple. The rest of the area is all Jewish. And truth be told, the Decapolis is really set apart, split by the Jordan River from Galilee proper. The Decapolis, again, a Greek area, was really under a different jurisdiction in the Roman province than Galilee was. Now, you look just to the south, you've heard about the Good Samaritan, and you've heard about Jesus talking to Samaritans. Well, they came from this region of Samaria. It's south of Galilee, of course, and it was a mixed population that really kind of resulted from political transfers of the population when, and these people, the Jews, didn't consider them to be real Jews, because while the Jewish temple was situated on the Temple Mount down in Jerusalem, the Samaritans gathered at Mount Gerizim up to the, well, my goodness, it's not even marked there, is it? Oh, yeah, sorry, there it is. Just south of Sychar. So Mount Gerizim is where they went to worship together, where they went to have the yearly rituals, the annual rituals, and the repeating rituals. But also the Samaritans only recognized the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Torah. That was the only scripture they recognized. And the textual form that they used was different from the one being used among the Jews. So while the Jews looked at the Torah, the 5 books, commonly called the 5 books of Moses, they also looked at what was called the Nevi'im, which was the prophets, and then there was the Ketuvim, which were the writings, which included, oh goodness, like wisdom literature, like Job and Proverbs and all like that. The funny thing, the Psalms was actually included among the prophets in the Hebrew writing. So they've got a different place to worship and a different understanding of the text, different translation of it, and because really in down in Judea, most of them were using what looks to be not a Hebrew Bible at all, but the Greek translation called the Septuagint. In fact, when we look at Jesus, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but when we look at Jesus quoting from like Isaiah, for example, the translation that he's quoting from is the Greek translation, the Septuagint. So the Samaritans were always kind of looked down on by the Jews proper from the province of Judea. So then down in Judea is where we see so many of those names that are recognizable. There's Hebron, there's Bethany, where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. There's Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. Jerusalem, of course, is the capital city and the capital of the Roman province of Judea. But you see Jericho and Arimathea, you know, the guy Joseph who came from there, who was a Pharisee, who had actually given his burial place, the cave, for Jesus to be buried. Let's see, and also, oh yeah, Qumran, that we talked about last time, that where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, right there on the edge of the Dead Sea. So Judea, the name Judea had 2 different senses. first is that it meant the area that surrounded Jerusalem, and secondly, it meant the whole area inhabited by the Jews. And eventually, that whole area became a Roman province. The mountainous region that surrounds Jerusalem is very dry, very bare, frankly, a wilderness. To the east is the Dead Sea, and in the oasis area north of the Dead Sea is Jericho, which is thought to be one of the oldest cities in the whole world. Jericho and Damascus are two of the most ancient cities still to be existing and still to be populated in all of world history. Then Jerusalem itself, the city, to the Jews, Jerusalem was the center of the world. God lived there in the temple, and the Jews went there on a pilgrimage at least once a year. It was also the economic and cultural and administrative center of the Roman province. And so, but the Roman administration of Palestine was actually directed from Caesarea. But Jerusalem will eventually become the seat of the Roman, what do I say, prefect, called sometimes procurator, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So one of the most important groups of people in that time is the Herods. And we think about Herod, we think about the Herod that Jesus, or rather that the Magi encountered, the king that when they came to follow the star and to see Jesus, he's the one that they encountered. That one is known as Herod the Great. You can lose that map now, Nathan. Herod the Great. At the time of the birth of Jesus, Palestine was ruled by a Roman vassal king, and that was Herod the Great. He was renowned for his building projects and for his really kind of ruthless and arbitrary rule. And towards the end of his rule, it was nothing but abject paranoia, a bit of a monster. Well, he will rule until 4 BC. Yep, 4 BC. So here's Jesus born, and the wise men are coming, the Magi are coming to see him. They encounter Herod, and yet the year is 4 BC, and we know it's 4 BC. Roman records, being what they are, give us very specific dates. So what we're left with is that what we now call the date of the birth of Jesus, which would be 1 AD, was actually off a little bit. I know, seems miraculous that Jesus was born 4 years before he was born, but he started early on his miraculous career. And if you can be born by a virgin, being born 4 years before yourself doesn't seem like that big of a deal, does it? Well, after Herod, his dominion then was divided into 3 parts among his 3 sons. And you know what? And that's where I need image number 2, Nathan. And that is where when that was, what do I say, divided among the 3, then it wound up having 1/3 of it went to, well, first off, let's look at the 4 identified wives of King Herod. Now, truthfully, Herod had 10 wives, but there's only 4 of them that really get listed anywhere. The first one, Mariamne the first, she wasn't called the first, she was just Mariamne, the first one to be called that of his wives. Their child was Aristobulus. The second wife, apparently Herod was fond of women named Mariamne. The second wife with the name, they had the child Herod Philip. The third one, actually two sons from the third wife, Malthus, was Herod Antipas and Archelaus. And then the fourth wife identified, Cleopatra, we have Herod Philip. Now, so Herod the Great, after his death, his dominion divided into the three parts among these sons, Herod Antipas, Archelaus, and Herod Philip. They continued on as Roman vassals. Archelaus is given control of Judea and the region of Perea, just east of the Jordan River. But he was an awful, awful king. And in 6 AD, complaints from his subjects led to him being called back to Rome by the Emperor Augustus, and he was exiled to Gaul. Today we call it France. Well, if you got to be exiled to someplace, not a bad gig. So it was it was a punishment, but could have been a whole lot worse. At the same time, Judea and Samaria and Idumea that were on the map that we had seen, they were united then to form the province of Judea. So what had been broken up among the three sons between Archelaus is now gone, and he ruled Judea and Samaria. Herod Antipas, who ruled Galilee and Perea, will have that absorbed into his dominion. But the Romans in 6 are going to start playing a little bit more of a heavy hand. The Roman tactic usually was to let the local kings stay on as kings, or at least to have local governors that the people knew and maybe they trusted their family. And that was kind of the thing with them. And the truth is that the Romans actually they really bent over backwards to show favor to the people of Judea, to the Jews. Whereas they were supposed to, I think we talked about this last time, whereas the conquered peoples were supposed to adhere to the religion of the Roman Empire, especially the cult of the Caesars, for the Jews, it wasn't quite like that. They let them maintain their monotheistic religion. They let them maintain the temple in Jerusalem. And, but it's going to start cracking down a little bit when the Romans will send a governor of their own to start exercising control over Judea and especially Jerusalem itself. What's his name? Archelaus takes off for, that sounds professional, does it? What's his name? Archelaus winds up going off to Gaul, and now you've got that region locked into a Roman province, and the administrator of that province is going to be under the imperial legate of Syria. Syria was the massive section, and this administrator was a representative of Rome, and at first he was a prefect, and then later they appointed a procurator. But that's going to change too. Galilee was ruled by, like I said, Archelaus's brother, Herod Antipas. His actions too can cause such bad blood among his subjects. Well, for example, it was Herod Antipas who had John the Baptist beheaded because John had criticized Antipas because he said that he had actually committed incest because Antipas had married his wife's widow. Bad form in Judaism. You're not supposed to do that. So he was eventually, John the Baptist was executed. Look in Mark chapter 6. And Antipas will rule Galilee from 4 BC, immediately after the death of Herod the Great, all the way through 39 AD. So he will be there for the whole career of Jesus' ministry, as well as what was going on with the disciples too. And it was Antipas who received Jesus from Pontius Pilate. And because remember, Pontius Pilate is is looking at the case, and he decides he's going to send him over to Herod Antipas, and then Herod decides he's going to send him back. We'll talk about why in a little bit. So the only one of Herod the Great's sons to really be a successful ruler was Herod Philip, who ruled from Galilee from 4 BC, immediately after the death of Herod the Great, through 34 AD. And he ruled the regions north and west of Galilee. So, in the year 26, now, Caesar Augustus is dead, died a natural death, and he had adopted his nephew, Tiberius. And Tiberius becomes the next of the Caesars. And Tiberius was actually a very able administrator, but he was just so weird. He was so perverse. And he actually moved his palace from the city of Rome to the island of Capri. And yeah, we don't even want to talk about all the things he did there. But while he was at Capri, he left in the city of Rome a certain right-hand man of his. He was the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, and his name was Sejanus. Sejanus is really the power behind the throne and is kind of calling the shots when Tiberius is away from the Senate and from the capital of Rome. So during this time, Sejanus, who has a special little lapdog, his name was Pontius Pilate, sends Pilate to Judea to become the governor there. Now, Pilate was a Roman equestrian, that is to say, he's from the knight class. He was from the Samnite clan of the Pontii, which is where he gets his name Pontius. He was appointed prefect of Judea through the intervention of Sejanus, and Sejanus, like I said, was a favorite of the Emperor Tiberius. So from the years 26 to 36, the Roman representative in Judea is Pontius Pilate. Actually, his name was Marcus Pontius Pilate. The problem with Pilate was that he just did not understand in the least the religious feelings of the Jews. This led to all kinds of repeated conflicts and protests, and in suppressing them, Pilate showed a lot of cruelty and a tendency to use strong measures. His response was always an over response. Now, while Pilate is usually recognized as a procurator, he's never called that in Matthew or in the Acts of the Apostles. Mark and Luke and John will actually only use his name Pilate, though the Greek term for procurator is used by Luke and Matthew in its basic sense. That's actually a big deal. Because of Judea's permanent military occupation by the Roman troops, and because of their permanent and regular taxation, and because of the Roman supervision of public order, including the jurisdiction of the region and municipal government, it's all Roman. All of these tests tend to make us understand that Judea is a province and not simply a territory. Now, if Pilate was a procurator, then he would be really nothing more than a military governor, but he rules a province. He carries the title of prefect, which makes him the personal representative in Judea of Tiberius Caesar. Pilate is not a senator or from the senatorial class. Rather, like I said, he's from the class of knights. He was a landowner. The knights were landowners and military officials who were given specific and sometimes extraordinary powers at the behest of the emperor. That his title was prefect is confirmed by inscriptions that we find in Caesarea in ancient Palestine, where those inscriptions refer to him as prefect. Again, it's a big deal because a prefect has what's called the imperium, and the imperium is basically the power of life and death. The synoptic gospels, and when I say synoptic gospels, of course, we're talking about Mark and Matthew and Luke, they present the trial in front of Pilate actually remarkably well. There's really funny little idiosyncrasies in Roman law, especially in Roman law in the provinces, and the synoptic writers nail it. They have it recorded perfectly. While the charge against Jesus is never clearly indicated, the charge is clearly indicated, but it's not a charge against a particular Roman law. Rather, it's presented as a charge of certain undesirable actions on which Pilate is asked to pass judgment. Now, the Sanhedrin court, the Jewish court, had found Jesus guilty of blasphemy, but they had no authority to execute anybody under Roman law, and the Jews want to execute Jesus. This is why they sent him to Pilate, because Pilate, having the power of the imperium, has the power to put him to death. But here's the problem. Pilate was the ruler of Judea, and Jesus is from Galilee. So Galilee is under the vassal rulership of Herod Antipas now. So Pilate decides to send Jesus to Herod Antipas because Herod Antipas is the ruler of where Jesus was, had his permanent residence, we can say. Now, Herod Antipas doesn't want to pass judgment. And so he sends Jesus back to Pilate in Judea, where the so-called blasphemous actions actually took place. So while Jesus was a permanent resident of Galilee, and frankly, most of Jesus' ministry took place in Galilee, Antipas doesn't want to deal with it. And so he sends him back to Rome because actually it was the Jewish Sanhedrin court in Jerusalem who had brought the charges. It was so many actions in and around Jerusalem that he said, nope, the crimes took place in your jurisdiction, so you, Pilate, are going to pass judgment. After all, Pilate is the Roman prefect who has the power of the imperium, the power of capital punishment. But also, there is more than that. We see that, and the gospel writers, again, do very good about this, is that when it comes to Pilate, Pilate thinks, let's just give him a good whipping. There was 3 forms of beating, scourging, I think the Bible calls it. There was the fustes, which was basically just kind of I don't want to say a light beating, but it was a bad enough beating. Then there was the flagella, which was a more punishing, but that stood alone. But the third thing was the verbera. The verbera was never a punishment in itself, but it was always associated with other punishments. Think about Jesus. He got the scourging because he was going to be crucified. So the verbera punishment, the heaviest scourging, was only a preamble to capital punishment, to execution. Now, that the fustes, the lightest form, was usually associated with a warning, like I said. When the governor decides that the situation doesn't really require a formal trial and sentence, and that's probably what Luke has in mind when he represents Pilate as saying, you brought this man to me as disturbing the people, but he's done nothing deserving the death penalty. So I'm going to give him a warning and let him go. That warning is the phustes, as I mentioned, the lighter beating. And of course, at that point, lighter and heavier only becomes a relative thing because you don't want any of those beatings. In Luke, the Greek term for warning is a little bit ambiguous, but we should probably render it as teach him a lesson. So Jesus is going to be taught a lesson by this beating that's not so bad as the other two beatings, but at least this way we'll teach him a little lesson not to be messing with, the public order. And Pilate probably thought that this cautionary beating is enough. Kind of like think about when St. Paul was at Philippi and at Jerusalem when he was first arrested by the military tribune there. So the synoptic writers get the technicalities right in this very small matter, but for those of us who are nitpicky about history, it shows if they're right on this, we can trust them on so many other things as well. So the severe beating accompanies the capital punishment of death, and the lighter whipping goes with an idea of teaching a lesson. Well, we have to say something about the incident in Luke of the dispatch of Jesus to Herod as the ruler of Palestine. Pilate did this because, like I said, Christ came from that region of where Herod has the power, in the words of Luke anyway. So again, and like I mentioned, the same thing happens to Paul when the procurator Felix asks Paul, what province did you come from? So neither Pilate nor Felix nor Gallio, the one that Paul had to go to, they never really hesitated to deal with the defendant whose place of origin was from outside their own province when the person is charged with a crime inside there. So, okay, why this question? It's just a fine point of Roman law. The point was strictly that a person was supposed to be tried by the governor of their province, of their permanent home, no matter where the offense was committed. But that usage winds up getting changed for practical reasons by a series of ordinances that will allow trial in the province where the crime was committed. So with what we read in the Gospels, we can see the historical change where these ordinances are starting to take effect now. And it looks like that Pilate and Herod Antipas, and later on even Felix and Gallio, are still kind of feeling their way through these new ordinances, and it winds up making the Romans and the Herods a bit like the Clampetts, that they can't quite find their way into what we're supposed to do. So now Pilate, when all this is done, or as this is going on, actually, he had been, like I said, protected by Sejanus, the prefect of the Praetorian Guard and right-hand man of the Emperor Tiberius. But he winds up incurring the enmity, the wrath, the insurrection of the Jews in Roman-occupied Palestine, now Judea. Why? Because he wound up insulting their religious sensibilities. Like, for example, he hung images of the emperor all throughout Jerusalem, which is supposed to be the holy city. I mean, that, like I said, that's the center of the world for the Jews. And so he winds up putting up the emperor's, Tiberius, image everywhere, statues, busts, the relief sculpture they would have on these round plaques, and they're putting them everywhere, even in the temple district. Now, back in the book of Daniel, when it talks about that Antiochus IV, and it actually is referring to, in Daniel, it calls him by another name, but it talks about the abomination of desolation. And what happened there is that Antiochus IV actually sacrificed pigs on the high altar in Jerusalem. They called that the abomination of desolation. Jesus makes reference to that again when he talks about when you see the abomination of desolation. Okay, that was a thing already finished back in the time of Antiochus, like what, 175 BC. But he's talking about another event like that, and sure enough, that's what happens during the reign of or the governorship of Pilate. Is he winds up defiling the temple district with images of the emperor. The Jews get all kinds of upset about that, and so, and he actually had coins that had pagan religious symbols minted on them, and the Jews were supposed to carry on commerce with these coins with pagan stuff on them. They get upset. But as long as Sejanus is there, he's kind of okay. Problem is, Sejanus falls from power in the year 31, and that is right during the ministry of Jesus. Sejanus is out, and there's nobody to protect Pontius Pilate. So then, Pilate gets exposed to even sharper criticism from the Jews, and they were probably capitalizing on his newfound vulnerability, and in order to, or because of that, they were able to put pressure on Pilate to obtain the death sentence on Jesus. Look in John chapter 19. Now, the Samaritans had reported Pilate to the legate of Syria, the governor of Syria, named Vitellius, who will later become an emperor, after Pilate had attacked the Samaritans on Mount Gerizim. That was in the year 36. Well, after it's all over with, Pilate is ordered back to Rome. He goes back to Rome to stand trial for cruelty and for oppression, particularly on the charge that he had executed people without proper trial. According to the church historian Eusebius, in the book Ecclesiastical History, Pilate went back to Rome and committed suicide on orders from the emperor. Sometimes the church tradition makes Pilate to be sometimes a coward, and certainly the Gospels kind of support that picture. But also sometimes they even make him to be almost a hero. In fact, in the I don't want to get this wrong. I think it's in the Coptic Orthodox Church. Pilate and his wife are almost treated like saints. That's a tragic misreading of the story. Pilate, his wife having the dream and all that stuff, in many ways it looks like that the writers were trying to take it easy on the Romans and putting more blame on the Jews because, man, the Romans are after them at that point. So it looks like they're kind of taking a soft shoe approach to really pointing out just how awful Pontius Pilate was. I mean, if the Romans are going to recall him and try him for cruelty and for excessive brutality, it's got to be pretty bad. These folks who watched gladiator fights and people being torn apart by wild animals just for entertainment. So if they call him brutal, he was brutal. So Pilate then, in the year 36, and that's only 3 to 4 years, 5 years after the death of Jesus, after the crucifixion, Pilate is gone from there back home, and the Romans will send a new governor later. Well, in fact, Paul will meet him, and we'll talk about those like Felix and Festus and the rest of them. Okay, after the rule of Pilate is finished, the situation in Palestine becomes more and more tense, and it finally comes to an explosion in the year 66. Now, Pilate's been gone for a while, but the turmoil is just increasing more and more and more. The year 66, it was the beginning of what they called the Jewish War. the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus was the one who wrote the book called The Jewish War. At first, the rebels seemed to be doing okay. The battle against the technical and material supremacy of Rome was really kind of hopeless from the very beginning. Jerusalem was finally conquered in the year 70, and the temple was destroyed. The last pocket of resistance was on the mountain fortress of Masada, and that finally fell in the year 73. We talked about that back in the first class, where we saw the ramp that had been like 2 miles long that had been built so that the Roman troops and their siege engines could be pushed up that ramp, that long, slowly sloping ramp, in order to besiege the fortress of Masada there. It was not the complete destruction of Jerusalem at that, or of Judea at that point, but Jerusalem was destroyed. I think I told you that Rome only really destroyed 2 cities, Carthage and Jerusalem. In fact, Pastor, if I think image number 3 will show us that a certain detail from the what do I want to say, the triumphal arch of Titus, and you can see where they were plundering the temple, because there's the big menorah, the 7 branched candelabrum, and other things that were being carted out of the temple and taken back to Rome. So when Titus returned, and Titus was the Roman general who had destroyed Rome and the temple and captured Masada, eventually Titus will become the emperor, and he will create this triumphal arch, and this will be one of the main panels on that arch, showing his destruction of Jerusalem. It won't be until about the year 150 when the Romans they've put up with enough rebellions from the Jews for all this time. And a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba, that some will call him the Messiah, he's going to lead this revolt against the Romans, and this time the Romans fall with full force. They had already dispatched the 10th Legion, and the 10th Legion was like, I don't know, think of like Navy SEALs or Green Beret or something like that. These are the crack troops of the Roman army. They had been Julius Caesar's hand-picked army, and now we're 200 years since Caesar, but still, this was where the best of the best went to fight. And so the 10th Legion was there in Palestine, in Judea, and when this Bar Kokhba rebellion erupts, they are reinforced by elements of the 12th and 13th Legion coming from Syria. And so in these days, a legion is, well, we like to say that it was 10,000 troops. Truth is, they were hardly ever at full strength. Most of the time, a legion is 6,000 troops. But you think about having the full 10th Legion and elements of the others, we're probably talking somewhere around 20,000 Roman troops. And the Romans were just amazing. First off, they were the great engineers, like the capturing of Masada with the ramp. And secondly, they were never caught by surprise, or rarely caught by surprise, because every time they would encamp, they would build these, they would spend half the day building a fortress or an armed camp, and so night attacks were never successful against them. The Romans then just lay waste to Judea. In fact, by the time the Bar Kokhba rebellion has been crushed, the Jews have been taken out of Palestine, out of Judea. They're sent to far distant points in the empire. They're sent to Spain. They're sent to North Africa. They're sent to, in fact, Judea becomes depopulated of Jews. There aren't any more Jews there. They had all been scattered elsewhere. There's plenty of Greeks. There's Egyptians. There's those from Mesopotamia. There's plenty of other folks there, and plenty of Romans. And the Romans would always let their retiring soldiers, you had to serve 20 years in the Roman army. But after your 20 years, they would usually let you pick what province you want to live in. And so a lot of them were choosing to go there. So there was no Jews left, but almost everybody else. Like I said, there was a lot of Greeks there. And so we just want to talk for a minute about this Greek culture. It was called Hellenistic culture because the Greeks referred to their land as Hellas. And so the Greeks called themselves Hellenes. So, but in this Hellenistic culture in Palestine, we have an interaction between Greek culture and cultures of the Near East as a result of the conquest of Alexander the Great. Palestine was one of those areas that was settled by people of Greek origin. The newcomers had settled in some of those Phoenician cities along the Mediterranean coast. Remember, we had talked about Byblos, Sidon, and Tyre. And they also founded new Greek cities farther inland. And those, their administration and their economy and their legal systems and official religion was all based on the Greek model. Now, the Hellenization of Judea was reinforced by this rule of pro-Greek kings from the 3rd century BC onwards through the Roman administration. The dynasty of Herod, the Herodians that we had talked about, who had ruled as a Roman vassal, they admired Greek culture and they adopted Greek manners and Greek dress. And the ruling Jewish elite was kind of open to Hellenism. In spite of the influence of Hellenism, though, the Jews never gave up their absolute monotheism, belief in one God. Of course, the Greeks and the Romans all had many, many, many gods. And the influence of Hellenism wasn't really equally great in all the sections of the population. In fact, the rural population hardly spoke Greek at all. By contrast, in the towns, even the lower classes knew Greek. When we look at the quotations, like I was talking about earlier, the quotations from the Old Testament in the Gospels, we see that they're quoting from the Greek Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible. Okay, so then, what languages are spoken in Palestine? We always like to think that, well, if they're Jewish, they must be speaking Hebrew, but that's not really the case. The mother tongue of Jesus was Aramaic. Aramaic was actually the language of Damascus. And that became the, what they call it, lingua franca. That became the universal language at home and on the street throughout all of Palestine, all of Judea, all of the Middle East, really, from about the 7th century BC. And we're talking about the time of, like, you know, Isaiah of Jerusalem, onwards through the time of the administration of the Persian Empire, and as far as Egypt, and they just ousted most of the other languages of the Middle East. In Judea, Hebrew did survive along its close cousin Aramaic as a spoken language up until the first half of the 2nd century. After then, again, because of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, nobody's speaking Hebrew there. Aramaic, still yes. And we really don't know how widespread the knowledge of Greek language in Palestine was during the time of Jesus. But at least we know that government, it was impossible to have government without mastery of Greek. So Jesus probably appeared before Pilate and was probably answering Pilate in Greek. I doubt that it would have been Latin, because Latin really wasn't spoken in the eastern half of the empire, but Greek sure was. And while Jesus certainly spoke Aramaic and spoke Hebrew, again, he was reading from the Greek translation, if we can take as gospel, the synoptic gospels. And And so these two languages, Greek and Aramaic, are what is spoken by people on the street. Again, out in the countryside, it's just Aramaic. But in the towns and in the cities, even the lower classes, like I said, know Greek. Relations with Jews living outside of Palestine, that also demanded a command of Greek. Because in Egypt, for example, in Alexandria, the Jewish population there appears to have known only Greek, not even Aramaic, not even Hebrew. So the need for a knowledge of Greek in Palestine was also increased because of the Greek cities that had been developed there. Among the different social classes, a command of Greek, though, was kind of dependent on what your job was, where you were located. And the city-dwelling upper class probably had the full command of Greek as well as Aramaic and probably Hebrew too. But the language skills start to diminish the farther out you go. In the time of Jesus, there were several large farms that had grown up in Palestine, and they kind of restricted the livelihood of ordinary peasants. These massive farms were crowding out the small family farms. Some things never change. In addition, farmers also suffered from heavy taxation. If you owned land, you're gonna get taxed. In fact, the Roman slogan was to bleed them dry, tax them for everything you can. The impoverished rural population began to move to the towns then, where there was at least some economic activity and trade and craftsmanship and other stuff like that could be concentrated in the towns and cities. So when we think about Jesus, for example, or let's talk about Joseph. Joseph is a craftsman. It doesn't look like he owns any land, any place. There have been some who suggested he may have owned a small farm, and that maybe even Mary had inherited a small farm. But the fact is, he's a craftsman first, which means Jesus is not coming from a wealthy family. The wealthiest, like I said, were those mega farm owners who own massive amounts of land. Then the second level was those who were craftsmen and landowners. And then the very lowest was the craftsmen only. And counted among those craftsmen were not only carpenters and masons and things like that, but also you would have to include the fishers. Now, the fleet owners, because there were many fishing boats that were sometimes part of the same fishing company, we'll say, yeah, they probably had a good bit of wealth to them. Nothing massive, but still, they were not quite the oppressed. And so it's also why a lot of times we see Jesus taking the side of the oppressed. Why? He had seen it firsthand. He didn't come from a huge city. It wasn't like Jerusalem, and it certainly wasn't like Athens or Rome, but still, Jesus had seen the disparity of wealth between the rich and the poor, watching the way certain rich people would go into the temple and how they would pay with bags of silver, and yet there was others, think of the widow, who only had copper pieces. So in Palestine, in Judea, we see the very same kind of wealth disparity that we've seen all throughout history. Things weren't different. There were very wealthy Jews who actually could buy a little patronage from the Roman occupiers, but if you didn't have money and you couldn't afford a bribe, then things were going to be awful for you. And so again, a lot of times they would move out of the country into the city to try to get some kind of a servile job. In a word, we look at Palestine and we look at Judea, and it's It's just no different. The same problems. When Jesus said, "The poor you will have with you always," he wasn't kidding. And we look at our own time and see the super rich and the super poor, and a disappearing middle class. Well, the same thing was happening in the Roman Empire as social classes were getting farther and farther and farther apart. Jesus and the disciples had much to say about that. But this is where we are. And all right, Chuck, you're going to make it by 8:30. This is where we'll call it quits here, but we'll open it up to questions, because when you read through the Gospels, this really does give you kind of an understanding about who's in charge of what and where are they located, and why is it such a big deal to talk about the poor widow woman. Why is it so? Hopefully this gives a little bit of insight as we look at the life and times of Jesus in Palestine. Next time, we will take a few items out of the Gospels and maybe even look ahead to what Paul and the rest of the disciples were doing, and the historical events that they encountered too. But also next time, like to open it up for questions if you've got them. So think about questions that you've got as you've read through the Gospels, and certain things that didn't mean or that didn't have a ready answer for you. I'm not saying I'm the shell answer man and I can have all those answers, but I can at least show you maybe where to go and look for them, or bring them back to you later. Anyway, Pastor.
Yep, I muted. Okay. We have this great new feature in Zoom. We can have multiple spotlight people, so I can keep you on the screen with me, Travis. And
all right.
You're great on your feet with the questions we would bring, but if you want to email them ahead of time to me or Travis, that would be great as well. So good on your feet. But prep is also nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have any pressing questions. You're getting me thinking though, when you said all the Jews were expelled from the area after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. I did a quick search to get my head around the time frame of that, but got thinking about those diaspora communities.
Yes.
That I'm familiar with, of like Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic, way later, but it made me, it's a longer legacy of that dispersion,
Mm-hmm. Well, and remember, the dispersion had begun under the Assyrians when they scattered the 10 tribes of the north, and all that was left was Benjamin and Judah. And the Romans then kind of finished off the dispersion by getting rid of them. There were many others, like in Europe, who could identify what tribe they came from. I think, for example, Nostradamus. He was of the tribe of Ephraim. And the tribe of Ephraim was supposed to be noted for their prophetic abilities and all like that. So for whether he was a prophet or not, don't know. But at least he claimed the prophetic ability because of his association with that tribe. So there were many tribes that would still have at least an oral history, that we came from this place or that place. But to be able to find a community of them became increasingly more difficult.
Cool. Well, thank you again for tonight. I'll stop the recording and then we can continue with other questions.